Hi, I'm Mike from 1A Auto. We've been selling auto parts for over 30 years. We're dedicated to delivering quality auto parts, expert customer service, fast and free shipping, all backed by our 100% satisfaction guarantee. So visit us at 1AAuto.com, your trusted source for quality auto parts.
In this video, we're going to be working with our 2006 Chrysler 300. We're going to show you how to remove and replace the vehicle's drive shaft. Ours is a 3.5 liter rear wheel drive. However, this process should be very similar in the other engine options as well as the all-wheel drive models. If you like this video, please click subscribe. We have a ton more information on this and many other vehicles. And if you ever need parts for your car, you can follow the link down in the description over to 1AAuto.com. Here are the items you'll need for this repair. Unplug both of your downstream O2 sensors. The driver's side connector is hanging here on the side of the transmission. Make sure it hangs freely. And the passenger one connects right here at the transmission crossmember. On the driver's side of the exhaust, there's a heat shield that we'll need to remove. There's a 13 millimeter on the end on each side that will take off with our socket, ratchet, and extension. Depending on your exhaust, you may need to use a universal joint. Remove the heat shield. And then there's a 16 millimeter nut on each side that we'll remove with our 16 millimeter socket and ratchet. We'll repeat this step on the opposite side. So all the way at the back of the exhaust, we'll undo the 13 millimeter bolt securing this exhaust hanger bracket on each side. Now this is an aftermarket exhaust, so you may just be able to slide yours out of that bushing. But for these, we're going to have to remove that bolt and the bracket from each side. We'll then spray these down with some penetrating oil and remove the upper part from this stud. This side's a lot harder because of how tightly it's wrapped. Again, this is aftermarket, so yours may slide out on the bottom, but we'll do the top. Remove the 4 13 millimeter nuts securing this cross member while having a friend support half the exhaust, at which point both of you can lower it down from the vehicle. These rubber hangers can be tricky to remove. However, once you get them past the head there, you should just be able to pull them off by hand. I like to use a pair of groove-jawed pliers to pop them out. They also make a special exhaust hanger tool for these that works really nicely. But most of the time, as long as you lube them up, you can pop them off with these. Sometimes you can even get them off by hand. When removing the last nut, be sure to have somebody supporting the exhaust. Remove the cross member and then grab the front of the exhaust. Pull down and back. Now where we did manage to get most of our hardware off nice and easy, one of our studs has rusted into the flange on the end of the exhaust. This isn't common, but you may need to pry or wiggle the exhaust to get it to free up. Pull back and down and remove the exhaust from the vehicle. Remove the 4 11 millimeter nuts securing this heat shield to the bottom of the vehicle. We'll do this with an 11 millimeter socket and ratchet. Now it's possible that these will break through the heat shield when you're removing them. Two of ours already have, but we'll show you how to make those stay in when we put it back. It's a great example of what's going to happen. So we're going to want to remove all the nuts anyway, since we'll have to space them to reinstall this. You'll now want to index your drive shaft to make sure that it goes in the same way it came out, because these are balanced. So what we'll do, because these are a little tricky to mark, especially with the rubber coupling, I'm going to mark the yoke coming out of our differential, and then I'm going to mark this ear on our flange to make sure that these get lined up. Then obviously the rest will be bolted in the same way. Remove the 3 T60 Torx bolts and 18mm nuts securing the drive shaft coupling to the differential flange. We do not want to remove the 3 bolts securing the drive shaft to the coupling. We'll do this using a T60 Torx socket, ratchet, and an 18mm wrench. Make sure your vehicle is in neutral so we can rotate it and continue removing our hardware. We'll now move on to the transmission side of the drive shaft. You want to index this as well. This time I'm marking the flat of the drive shaft and an ear on the transmission output. Doesn't really matter where or how you do this, as long as it makes sense to you and you're able to realign the marks later. Support the nut with an 18mm wrench and use your T60 Torx to remove the bolt. We're going to put some large zip ties through 2 of the holes in the front of our drive shaft coupling at the transmission, just to ensure that this doesn't go anywhere when we remove our center bearing. We can now remove the 2 13mm bolts securing our center bearing to the vehicle. With our front coupling secured and our center support bearing hanging, we use a pry bar to try to separate our rear coupling from the differential. You may have to work this quite a bit, especially if your rubber is all torn and beat up like ours is. You may want someone to support the other end of the drive shaft for you. What we're going to do is, ours is being particularly stubborn, so I'm going to use a striking pry bar to put right on the coupling where it mounts onto our transmission output and tap it free. We'll then rotate the drive shaft and repeat this process with the other 2 parts of the coupling. Now you can slide the drive shaft back and remove the entire assembly from the vehicle. Reinstall your drive shaft. When reinstalling your drive shaft, make sure your indexing marks are aligned and that the center of your drive shaft lands onto the alignment pin in the center of the flange it bolts to before reinstalling your T60 Torx bolts and 18mm nuts. Install these by hand just to keep it in place until we can line up the front. Tighten down your T60 Torx bolts with a T60 Torx socket and a ratchet, and an 18mm wrench to hold the nut on the opposite side. Torque the bolts to 43 foot-pounds. You'll need to add an extension to your T65 Torx and Ratchet and your 18mm wrench to tighten up the bolts at the front by the transmission. You'll then torque these 3 bolts to 43 foot-pounds as well. You can now reinstall the center bearing bolts. One of our bolts broke, so I'm replacing it with a bolt of the same length and thread. This is going to have a different size head, however. The factory bolts will be tightened down with a 13mm socket and ratchet. Reinstall the heat shield. And any of the nuts and washers that have not been blown out around the sides. Actually, quite a few of ours have, so we'll have to deal with that. What I'm going to do is install the one that isn't damaged. And for the other side, I just have a large washer that I found around the shop, which we'll put on first, and then follow up with our original hardware. This will help keep our heat shield in place as opposed to replacing it. You don't want this rattling around or falling onto the exhaust because it's going to make a lot of noise and not be efficient at what it was designed to do. Tighten the hardware back onto your heat shield with an 11mm socket and ratchet. Now you really don't want to go super tight with these because it's only going to make those blown out soft sections of the heat shield worse. Now once again, because I'm on the lift, I'm using some help to get the exhaust in here. But at home, we'll show you the trick you can use. On Matt's end of the vehicle, I have bungee cords hanging from a hole near the original exhaust hangers. So I'm going to line up the front of my exhaust and then place a screw jack under the middle. Now at home, you could easily do this with a jack or jack stands, especially if you're doing it on the ground. All the screw jack is a tall jack stand that makes it easier for me to use on the lift. So I'll support this end to keep it in place. And then to take some load off of Matt, I'll use my bungee cord in the back hole to help keep it in place. You may have to relocate some things once you get that rear hung up. So now I can safely install the rest of my exhaust parts without needing Matt to stand there and hold parts over his head. So now reinstall this cross brace here. Now this is not meant to support the exhaust. It is meant to catch it if something falls and also stiffen up the chassis of the vehicle a little bit. However, in this instance, I'm going to use it to hang the exhaust a little. So we'll get all of the 13mm nuts started and then tighten them down. Once again, we're just making the whole exhaust safer and easier to work on. So we've lined up the front of our exhaust. Now this is a ball and socket type of joint for the exhaust. So there's actually no gasket in here. You could put some sealant in there if you wanted to, but normally they seal up pretty well. So again, our exhaust has been modified. So ours has a pair of 16mm nuts on each side. Yours may vary, but I'll get both of those started on by hand. And for the inner sides on each, you're gonna need a universal joint. I like to wrap mine in tape just to make it a little bit stiffer so I have a little more control over it. We're using a long extension, a 16mm socket, and our ratchet to tighten the exhaust down. I'm gonna need to switch to a deep socket in just a second but it's easier to line up with a short one. The end of our threads are pretty rusted out there, but not the part that actually supports the exhaust. So I am going to push up just to get past those bad threads, get that started a little bit better on some real threads, and then we'll tighten both sides down. We'll install the 16mm nuts on the other side of our exhaust and tighten those down as well. Reinstall the heat shield over the studs, as well as the 13mm nut that goes over it, and tighten that down. Reconnect your oxygen sensors. The connector hangs down here on the driver's side. And is connected to the transmission crossmember on the passenger side. Spray a little penetrating oil into the bushing on your exhaust hanger. You should be able to just lift them, line them up, and slide them right on. Remove bungee cords if you use them to secure the other end of your exhaust. Reinstall your 13mm bolts on your rear exhaust hangers. Fire up your vehicle to check for exhaust leaks, and you're good to go.
Thanks for watching. Visit us at oneauto.com for quality auto parts, fast and free shipping, and the best customer service in the industry.